She closed her eyes and extended her hand, expecting an engagement ring, but instead she felt a slap on her face. The grand ballroom fell into a deafening silence, the kind that weighs heavy on the soul. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, their light reflecting off tear-streaked faces and clenched fists. 20,000 hearts beat as one, each person processing Lucas Benjamin's cruel words as they echoed through the elaborate sound system he had installed for his moment of manufactured hate. But hatred, as Lucas would soon learn, has a way of revealing unexpected strength in its intended targets. It began with a single voice. Deep in the crowd, an elderly woman's rich contralto rose above the silence, carrying the first lines of "Lift every voice and sing." The sound wavered at first, lonely and vulnerable in the vast space. Then another voice joined, and another, until the historic anthem swelled through the room like a tide of defiance. Aileen Wuornos, still standing on stage where moments ago she had expected a proposal, felt tears streaming down her face, not of humiliation, but of overwhelming emotion as she witnessed the transformation unfolding before her. The slap Lucas had delivered still stung her cheek, but the pain was nothing compared to the surge of strength she felt flowing from the crowd. Dr. Marcus Johnson, a respected neurosurgeon who had taken time from his busy schedule to attend what he thought was a celebration of change, stepped forward. His commanding presence drew all eyes as he ascended the stage. Lucas, who had been sneering at the crowd, suddenly found himself face to face with not just one man, but the embodied dignity of an entire community. "Mr. Benjamin," Dr. Johnson spoke, his voice carried clearly through the microphone Lucas had dropped. "You arranged this elaborate scheme to humiliate us. You spent $50 million not to celebrate love, but to orchestrate hate. That says more about your poverty of spirit than our worth." The crowd murmured in agreement, and something remarkable began to happen. Instead of dispersing, people began to rearrange themselves. Those with medical training moved to check on Aileen. Legal professionals formed a huddle, already discussing civil rights violations. Tech-savvy attendees ensured every second was being recorded from multiple angles. Arena James, the woman Lucas had presented as his fiancée, stood frozen in horror. The mask she had helped maintain crumbled as she watched the scene unfold. Her designer dress suddenly felt like a costume in a tragedy she no longer wanted to be part of. With trembling hands, she removed the diamond ring and placed it on the stage floor. "I didn't know," she whispered into the microphone, her voice breaking. "I didn't know the extent of his hatred. I cannot be part of this." She turned to Aileen, her eyes filled with genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry." The crowd's response was not what Lucas had expected. There was no chaos, no panic, no mass exodus that would fulfill his narrative of superiority. Instead, he watched in growing unease as the gathering transformed into an impromptu organizing committee. Business people in expensive suits shared contact information with civil rights activists. Young tech entrepreneurs offered their platforms for spreading awareness. Restaurant owners present at the event immediately began arranging food distribution so people could stay and plan their response. Sarah Chen, a local news reporter who had been invited to cover the engagement, was live-streaming everything. Her professional composure cracked only once, when she looked directly into her camera and said, "What we are witnessing tonight is not the story of one man's hate, but of a community's extraordinary resilience." The ballroom's elegant round tables became command centers. People who had arrived expecting champagne and celebration now passed around legal notepads and business cards. Smartphones illuminated determined faces as social media campaigns were born in real time. The very infrastructure Lucas had put in place for his grand gesture of hatred was being repurposed for justice. Dennis Foster, a retired judge in attendance, stood on a chair and called for attention. What Mr. Benjamin has done here tonight constitutes a clear case of public discrimination and emotional distress. But more than that, he has provided us with irrefutable evidence and 20,000 witnesses. A grim smile crossed his face. In trying to showcase his hate, he has given us every tool we need to fight it. Lucas's face, which had worn a triumphant sneer just moments ago, began to show the first signs of uncertainty. He had expected chaos, panic, and submission. Instead, he was watching his carefully orchestrated night of cruelty transform into something entirely different, a catalyst for change. The evening's darkness had indeed revealed something, but not what Lucas had intended. It revealed the unshakable strength of human dignity, the power of unity in the face of hatred, and the incredible capacity of a community to transform pain into purpose. As the night progressed, the luxury venue that Lucas had chosen for his display of hatred became something else entirely, the birthplace of a movement. The very walls that were meant to witness humiliation instead bore witness to the first steps of a revolution in civil rights and human dignity. The $50 million Lucas had spent trying to break a community's spirit had instead bought him a front-row seat to its triumph. As he stood there, increasingly isolated on his own stage, he watched his carefully constructed world of privilege and prejudice begin to crumble, one unified voice at a time. For in that ballroom, under the shimmer of crystal chandeliers and the steady glow of determination, 20,000 individuals had ceased to be merely party guests. They had become something far more powerful. They had become a community united in purpose, strength, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The night was far from over, and this was only the beginning. The video that changed everything. In the digital age, hatred can no longer hide in shadows. By sunrise, Lucas Benjamin's cruelty had become a global phenomenon, spreading across social media platforms with the unstoppable force of a digital tsunami. Sarah Chen's live stream had been just the beginning. As morning broke over the city, thousands of video clips from different angles flooded the internet. Each showed a different perspective of the previous night's events, but all told the same story, a man's calculated cruelty and a community's powerful response. The first clip to go viral was filmed by 16-year-old Maya Washington, who had attended the party with her parents. Her steady hands had captured the exact moment when Lucas's face transformed from false charm to unveiled hatred. The contrast was stark, his handsome features twisting into something ugly as he revealed his true nature. The video caught every word of his hateful speech, every gesture of contempt, and most crucially, the slap that would become evidence in the legal proceedings to come. Within hours, #JusticeForAileen was trending worldwide. Celebrities who had previously maintained business relationships with Lucas began posting public apologies and denouncements. Their statements ranged from carefully worded corporate distancing to raw, emotional videos expressing genuine shock and remorse for ever having associated with him. Technology executives who had attended the party immediately took action. Silicon Valley mogul James Chen, no relation to Sarah, posted a lengthy thread detailing every business interaction he'd ever had with Lucas, along with a pledge to redirect all future investments toward minority-owned businesses. His thread ended with a simple statement: "I was in that room. I saw everything, and I will spend the rest of my career making sure this never happens again." The videos caught everything. The grandmother who started singing, Dr. Johnson's powerful speech, Arena's renunciation, and most importantly, the community's remarkable response. International news organizations picked up the story, running special reports that analyzed Lucas's history of discrimination alongside the inspiring footage of unity and resistance. Social media experts noted something unusual about the video's spread. Unlike most viral content, which typically peaked and faded within hours, these clips seemed to gain momentum with each passing hour. Every new share came with personal stories, with people from around the world recounting their own experiences with discrimination and celebrating the strength shown by the community. Professional lip readers were brought in to analyze the footage, transcribing every hateful word Lucas had muttered under his breath. Body language experts dissected his gestures, pointing out the premeditated nature of his actions. Digital forensics teams verified the authenticity of the videos, confirming that none had been altered or manipulated. By midday, Lucas's business partners had seen enough. Emergency board meetings were called across various companies. Legal teams worked overtime drafting statements of severance. The stock prices of companies associated with Lucas began to plummet as investors rushed to distance themselves from the toxic association. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of the viral spread was its effect on Aileen's story. Rather than being portrayed as a victim, the video showed her dignity in the face of cruelty. Clips of her standing tall as the community rallied around her became symbols of resilience. News organizations seeking interviews found her thoughtful, articulate and focused, not on revenge, but on systemic change. The footage also captured unexpected moments of human connection. A clip of two elderly women, one black, one white, embracing and crying together, became a powerful symbol of solidarity. A series of photos showing young professionals exchanging contact information demonstrated the spontaneous organization of resistance. The videos showed humanity at both its worst and its best, and the contrast was striking. Social media platforms, often criticized for their role in spreading hatred, found themselves being used as tools for justice. Every hateful comment on the videos was quickly buried under an avalanche of support. People began organizing fundraisers, setting up support systems, and planning peaceful protests, all through the same digital channels that had exposed Lucas's hatred. Documentary filmmakers reached out, recognizing that the story unfolding was bigger than one night or one man's hatred. They saw in the footage a microcosm of America's ongoing struggle with racism, but also a testament to the power of unity and resistance in the digital age. As evening approached on that first day, Lucas attempted to release a carefully worded statement through his PR team. Within minutes, it was juxtaposed with clips of his hateful speech, his words of apology ringing hollow against the evidence of his actions. In trying to control the narrative, he had failed to understand a fundamental truth of the modern age. The camera doesn't just capture images, it captures truth. The video footage became more than just evidence. It became a teaching tool. Educators requested copies to show in classrooms. Corporate diversity trainers incorporated clips into their programs. Civil rights organizations archived the footage, recognizing its historical significance. By the end of that first day, the videos had been viewed hundreds of millions of times. But more importantly, they had sparked countless conversations, inspired numerous actions, and catalyzed a movement. In trying to orchestrate a spectacle of hatred, Lucas had instead created an indelible record of love's triumph over hate, of dignity's victory over degradation, of community's power over cruelty. The world was watching, and for once, the viral spread of content was serving the cause of justice. The videos had indeed changed everything, but not in the way Lucas had intended. They had become a digital testament to the enduring truth that light will always expose darkness, and that in the end, love is always more powerful than hate. Aileen's voice. For 3 days after the incident, Aileen Wuornos sat in contemplative silence in her modest apartment, watching as the world exploded with reactions to Lucas's cruelty. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, messages of support, and offers from publishers. But Aileen knew that when she finally spoke, it needed to be more than just a response to hatred. It needed to be a catalyst for change. On the fourth morning, she straightened her spine, adjusted her camera, and began recording what would become known as the Voice of Change speech. "My name is Aileen Wuornos," she began, her voice steady and clear, "and I am not here to tell you a story of victimhood. I'm here to tell you about transformation." The natural light from her window illuminated her face, the fading mark of Lucas's slap still visible, a badge she wore not of shame, but of survival. Her recorded speech, released simultaneously across multiple platforms, struck a chord that resonated far beyond the initial incident. She spoke not just of Lucas's betrayal, but of the systemic issues it represented. She shared not just her pain, but her vision for healing. "When Lucas Benjamin staged his elaborate scheme," she continued, "he thought he was writing a story of humiliation. But he forgot something crucial. He wasn't the author of this story. We all are. Every person in that room, every voice that rose in song, every hand that reached out in solidarity. We are all authors of what happens next." As she spoke about her background as a social worker in underprivileged communities, people began to understand why Lucas had chosen her as his target. Her genuine compassion and trust in others weren't weaknesses to be exploited, but strengths that had helped countless people. She had spent years building bridges between communities, organizing food drives, and creating mentorship programs for at-risk youth. "Yes, I trusted him," she acknowledged, her eyes fierce with conviction. "And some might call that naive. But I would rather live in a world where trust is possible than survive in one where fear rules. My mistake wasn't in trusting, it was in staying silent when I saw the early signs of his prejudice, hoping that love could change him without accountability." The speech shifted then, becoming a masterclass in turning personal pain into collective purpose. Aileen outlined her vision for a new organization, the Trust Again Foundation, dedicated to combining social justice with practical support for victims of discrimination. "We will take the $50 million that Lucas spent on hatred," she declared, "and multiply its impact through community action. Every dollar he spent trying to break us will build something beautiful." Her words sparked immediate action. Within hours of the video's release, corporate pledges began pouring in. The same business leaders who had attended the party now committed resources to her foundation. But more importantly, grassroots donations flooded in. $5, $10, whatever people could spare, each contribution, a statement that they stood with her vision. Aileen's voice grew stronger as she addressed the younger generation. "To every young person who has ever been made to feel less than worthy because of their skin color, their background, or their beliefs, your existence is not a mistake. Your presence is not an intrusion. You are the future we have been waiting for." The camera caught tears rolling down her cheeks, but her voice never wavered. "And to Lucas Benjamin, I have this to say. Thank you. Thank you for showing us exactly what we're fighting against. Thank you for uniting 20,000 people in a way that might have taken years otherwise. Thank you for reminding us that love without action is just sentiment and that true change requires both courage and commitment." She shared personal stories from her childhood, of her grandmother, who had worked as a domestic worker but made sure Aileen attended the best schools possible, of neighbors who shared what little they had, of small kindnesses that had shaped her worldview. "The slap that was meant to shame me," she said, touching her cheek, "has become a wake-up call for thousands. The party that was meant to humiliate us has become the founding moment of a movement. This is how we transform hatred into hope, not by ignoring it, not by returning it, but by transforming it." Leading news networks picked up the speech, running it in its entirety. Social media exploded with clips and quotes. Aileen's voice and entire transformation, not trauma, became trending topics worldwide, but more importantly, people began organizing local meetings, forming discussion groups, and creating action plans. The speech concluded with a challenge. I invite everyone, including those who have never faced discrimination, to join us in this transformation. Your voice matters, your actions matter, your commitment matters. Together, we can create a world where trust is not naive, where love is not weak, and where justice is not just a dream. As the video ended, Aileen sat back in her chair, emotionally drained but spiritually strengthened. Her phone began ringing immediately, not just with more interview requests, but with calls from community leaders, educators, and activists ready to turn her words into action. In the days that followed, her speech was translated into dozens of languages, analyzed in university classrooms, and quoted in congressional hearings. But perhaps its most significant impact was in the quiet conversations it sparked in homes and workplaces across the country, where people began to examine their own biases and commit to change. Aileen's voice, once targeted for silencing, had become a clarion call for transformation. The woman who had stood silent on that stage, feeling the sting of betrayal, had found not just her voice, but the voice of a generation ready for change. And this was only the beginning of her story. Corporate consequences. The fall of Lucas Benjamin's empire began not with a crash, but with a single email. At 9 a.m. sharp, 1 week after his hateful display, Morgan Stanley's board of directors sent a brief message terminating all investment relationships with Benjamin Enterprises. Within hours, it became a devastating avalanche. The pristine glass tower of Benjamin Enterprises, once a symbol of Lucas's success, now stood as a monument to his downfall. The building's 50 stories had housed dozens of companies, all carefully woven into a complex web of wealth and influence. Now, floor by floor, that web was unraveling. Martha Chen, CEO of Global Tech Solutions and one of Silicon Valley's most influential figures, led the charge. She didn't just withdraw her company's billion-dollar partnership with Benjamin Enterprises. She went further. Standing before a packed press conference, her voice unwavering, she announced, "We're not just cutting ties, we're creating change." Global Tech Solutions immediately launched a $500 million initiative to fund minority-owned tech startups, directly competing with Lucas's former ventures. The message was clear: the corporate world was not just distancing itself from racism, it was actively working to dismantle its foundations. The exodus continued. Major retailers pulled Benjamin-branded products from their shelves. Hotels operating under his license began rebranding overnight. The luxury car dealerships he owned across 3 continents found themselves without supplier contracts as manufacturers rushed to protect their reputations. Lucas's personal wealth, once estimated at $8.2 billion, began to evaporate. Stock prices of his public companies plummeted as investors jumped ship. The algorithms that had once traded millions in his favor now worked against him, responding to the overwhelming negative sentiment across social media and news platforms. But the most devastating blow came from within. Sarah Martinez, the longtime CFO of Benjamin Enterprises, had been quietly documenting Lucas's discriminatory practices for years. Now, she released a comprehensive report detailing systematic discrimination in hiring, promotion, and contract allocation across all his companies. The report was damning. It showed how Lucas had used complex financial structures to underpay minority employees, how contracts were unfairly denied to minority-owned businesses, and how harassment complaints were systematically buried under layers of legal bureaucracy. The Department of Justice launched an immediate investigation. The SEC began probing his financial dealings. The IRS assembled a special task force to examine years of suspicious tax filings. Every agency that had once been kept at bay by his army of lawyers now found their path cleared by public outrage and internal whistleblowers. In the executive suites of Benjamin Enterprises, chaos reigned. Longtime executives rushed to secure new positions elsewhere, each departure accompanied by a public statement of regret and promises to do better. The Human Resources Department was overwhelmed with discrimination complaints as employees, past and present, finally felt safe coming forward. The company's legal team, once considered among the most formidable in corporate America, began to crumble. Emma Rodriguez, head of legal affairs, resigned with a scathing public letter. "I can no longer defend the indefensible. Our legal expertise was used not to ensure justice, but to obstruct it." Lucas's attempt to salvage his empire through a press conference backfired spectacularly. His carefully scripted apology was interrupted by former employee James Washington, who stood up and recounted years of discrimination he had faced. The image of Lucas hurriedly leaving the podium as Washington spoke became another viral moment in his downfall. The real estate portfolio that had been his pride began to crumble. Commercial tenants invoked morality clauses to break their leases. Residential buildings bearing the Benjamin name saw property values plummet as owners demanded the removal of his brand. Banking relationships, the lifeblood of his empire, dried up overnight. Credit lines were frozen, loans were called in. The financial instruments that had once protected his wealth now accelerated its dissolution. Investment banks that had competed for his business now refused to take his calls. But perhaps the most poetic justice came from the very technology he had used to broadcast his hatred. The sophisticated audio-visual system he had installed for his cruel reveal party was now being used to broadcast the dismantling of his empire. Every corporate departure, every stock price drop, every legal filing was documented and shared across the same networks that had exposed his true nature. The corporate world, often criticized for its slow response to social issues, moved with unprecedented speed and unity. Companies that had once competed fiercely now collaborated on initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion, using resources formerly tied to Benjamin Enterprises. In a final twist of irony, the $50 million venue where he had staged his hateful display was acquired by a consortium of minority-owned businesses. They transformed it into the Center for Corporate Responsibility and Social Justice, a think tank dedicated to studying and promoting ethical business practices. 3 months after his spectacular fall from grace, Lucas Benjamin's empire had been reduced to a fraction of its former size. But more importantly, it had become a case study in corporate accountability, a reminder that in the modern age, no amount of wealth can shield hatred from consequences. The corporate world had sent a clear message. Racism was not just morally wrong, it was bad for business. The consequences of Lucas's actions had created a new standard for corporate responsibility, one that would influence business practices for generations to come. As Martha Chen had said in her press conference, "The true measure of corporate success is not just in profits but in purpose. Today, we choose purpose." And in boardrooms across the country, that choice was becoming a revolution. Legal justice. The mahogany-paneled courtroom of the Federal District Court fell silent as Judge Maria Rodriguez took her seat. The date was marked in history. Exactly 6 months after Lucas Benjamin's notorious party of hate, the case number 2024-CV-789 would become one of the most cited in civil rights law, The People and Aileen Wuornos vs. Lucas Benjamin. What made this case extraordinary wasn't just its high-profile nature. It was the unprecedented collaboration between government prosecutors, civil rights attorneys, and corporate whistleblowers. The legal team assembled against Lucas resembled a small army led by renowned civil rights attorney Marcus Thompson and former U.S. Attorney Sarah Patel. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating in its simplicity. "Your Honor," Thompson began, "this is not just about one party, one slap, or one man's hatred. This is about a systematic campaign of discrimination that spans decades, corrupts multiple industries, and has harmed thousands of lives." The evidence presented over the next 6 weeks was overwhelming. The prosecution had divided their case into 5 distinct parts, each more damaging than the last. First came the party itself. High-definition footage from multiple angles showed Lucas's premeditated cruelty. Audio experts testified about the sophisticated sound system he had installed specifically to maximize the impact of his hate speech. Event planners revealed how he had carefully orchestrated every detail to cause maximum humiliation. But it was the second phase that truly shocked the court. Sarah Martinez, the former CFO, presented years of internal documents showing how Lucas had created a complex system of financial discrimination. Spreadsheets revealed salary disparities. Emails exposed deliberate efforts to prevent minority advancement. Internal memos detailed strategies to avoid equal opportunity compliance. The third phase focused on the human cost. For 5 days straight, former employees testified about their experiences. Security guards spoke of being instructed to follow black customers in Benjamin's stores. Qualified candidates described being passed over for promotions. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a devastating picture of systematic oppression. The fourth phase dealt with the broader economic impact. Economists presented studies showing how Lucas's discriminatory practices had affected entire communities. Property values had been artificially suppressed in minority neighborhoods where he owned real estate. Small businesses had been strangled by predatory lending practices from his financial institutions. The fifth and final phase was perhaps the most powerful. Aileen Wuornos took the stand. For 3 days, she testified not just about the party, but about the months leading up to it. She described subtle red flags she had noticed but dismissed, small comments that had made her uncomfortable, and the gradual realization that she was being set up for public humiliation. Lucas's defense team, once considered among the best in the country, found themselves overwhelmed. Their attempts to paint the party as a misunderstanding crumbled under cross-examination. Their expert witnesses were discredited by their own past statements. Their character witnesses withdrew one by one as more evidence emerged. The turning point came when Lucas himself took the stand. Under the skillful cross-examination of Sarah Patel, his carefully maintained facade cracked. What began as smooth denials devolved into angry outbursts. When Patel presented him with emails he had written mocking civil rights legislation, he lost his composure entirely. "Yes, I did it!" he finally shouted, his face contorted with rage. "And I'd do it again! This country was better before—" The judge's gavel cut him off, but the damage was done. His true nature, already exposed at the party, was now permanently recorded in federal court transcripts. Judge Rodriguez's final ruling was unprecedented in its scope. Lucas was found guilty on all counts, including multiple violations of civil rights laws, systematic discrimination in employment and housing, financial fraud related to discriminatory practices, intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy to violate civil rights. The penalties were equally historic. $2.1 billion in compensatory damages, $5 billion in punitive damages, mandatory divestment from all businesses with government contracts, lifetime ban from serving as an officer in any public company, creation of a trust to fund civil rights initiatives overseen by an independent board. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the ruling was Judge Rodriguez's closing statement. The court recognizes that monetary penalties alone cannot heal the wounds of discrimination. Therefore, as part of this judgment, Mr. Benjamin will be required to fund a civil rights history center, establish scholarships for minority students, finance anti-discrimination training programs, create an annual civil rights lecture series, support rehabilitation programs for reformed white supremacists. The verdict received a standing ovation in the courtroom. Outside, thousands who had gathered to await the decision celebrated in the streets. News helicopters captured the scene as people of all races embraced, cried, and rejoiced together. Legal scholars would later note that the case set numerous precedents. It expanded the definition of hate crimes to include premeditated public humiliation. It established new standards for corporate liability in discrimination cases. It created a framework for calculating damages in systemic racism cases. It demonstrated how digital evidence could be used in civil rights proceedings. As Lucas was led from the courtroom, Aileen approached Judge Rodriguez. "Your Honor," she said, "this verdict isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. Every dollar taken from hatred will now serve justice." The judge smiled. "Ms. Warnos, today we've shown that the arc of justice may be long, but it bends toward truth, and sometimes it bends in ways we never expected." The case of the people and Aileen Warnos versus Lucas Benjamin would be taught in law schools for generations to come, not just as a legal precedent, but as a reminder that justice, when properly served, can transform even the darkest acts into sources of light. The community response. In the heart of downtown, where Lucas Benjamin's $50 million party venue once stood as a monument to hatred, something extraordinary was taking shape. The newly established Phoenix Foundation had transformed the space into a bustling community center, its walls now adorned with murals depicting stories of resilience and unity. 1 year after the infamous party, the building hummed with activity. What Lucas had intended as a stage for humiliation had become an incubator for hope. The transformation wasn't just symbolic, it was systematic and profound. The main ballroom, where Lucas had delivered his hateful speech, now served as a multi-purpose space called Unity Hall. On this particular morning, Dr. Maya Washington, a former party attendee turned foundation director, stood addressing a crowd of community leaders. "When we gathered here a year ago," she began, "one man thought he could break our spirit. Instead, he ignited a movement that would change our city forever." The audience, many of whom had been present that fateful night, nodded in recognition. The Phoenix Foundation's initiatives spread across 5 key areas. First was education. The foundation had established the Rise Up Scholarship Program, using part of the legal settlement to fund college education for minority students. In its first year alone, they had awarded full scholarships to 1,000 students. The program didn't just provide money, it offered mentorship, internships, and career guidance. James Chen, the tech executive who had been at the party, had developed a state-of-the-art coding academy within the building. Code for Change offered free programming courses to underprivileged youth, with guaranteed job placements at top tech companies. The first class of graduates had already secured positions at major firms, their average starting salary exceeding $95,000. The second initiative focused on small business development. The Foundation's Enterprise Empowerment Program provided microloans, business training, and mentorship to minority entrepreneurs. They had transformed the building's lower level into an incubator space where new businesses could operate rent-free for their first year. Sarah Martinez, Lucas's former CFO, now led the Foundation's financial literacy program. Her insider knowledge of corporate discrimination had helped her design courses that taught not just basic money management, but sophisticated strategies for building generational wealth. The third area was cultural preservation and celebration. The Heritage Gallery, occupying what was once Lucas's private suite, now housed rotating exhibitions of African-American art, history and culture. Monthly cultural festivals drew thousands, turning the space into a vibrant celebration of diversity. Fourth came advocacy and legal support. The foundation maintained a team of civil rights attorneys who provided free legal services to victims of discrimination. They had already handled hundreds of cases, setting precedents that would protect minority rights for generations to come. But perhaps the most powerful initiative was the Community Healing Program. Led by Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a trauma specialist, the program offered counseling, support groups, and workshops designed to help people process and transform their experiences with racism. The foundation's impact rippled far beyond its walls. Local businesses, inspired by their example, had implemented new diversity initiatives. Schools had revised their curricula to include more inclusive history. Even city planning had been influenced, with new projects focusing on equitable development. One of the most successful programs was the Unity Bridge initiative, which paired people from different backgrounds for monthly dinner discussions. These conversations, held in the same space where Lucas had planned to sow division, now fostered understanding and friendship across racial lines. The foundation also maintained a digital presence. Their website and social media channels shared success stories, educational resources, and opportunities for involvement. The hashtag #Phoenix Rising had become a symbol of hope and transformation across social media. Young people were particularly drawn to the foundation's work. The Youth Leadership Academy trained teenagers in community organizing, public speaking, and social justice advocacy. Many participants went on to start their own initiatives in their schools and neighborhoods. The building itself had become a symbol of transformation. The security system Lucas had installed to control and intimidate now ensured the safety of community members. The sophisticated audio-visual equipment meant for his cruel reveal was used for educational presentations and cultural performances. 1 year after Lucas's party, the foundation hosted a different kind of gathering. Called the Unity Celebration, it brought together everyone who had been at the original party, along with thousands of community members who had joined the movement since then. During the celebration, Aileen Warnos unveiled a new installation in the lobby, a wall of mirrors surrounded by the words, "Reflection brings resolution," in multiple languages. When Lucas wanted us to see ourselves through his eyes, she explained, he didn't realize we would end up seeing our true strength instead. The foundation's work attracted national attention. Other cities began requesting guidance on establishing similar programs. The model they had created, combining education, economic empowerment, cultural celebration, legal advocacy, and community healing, was being replicated across the country. As Dr. Washington concluded her morning address, she pointed to a quote newly installed above Unity Hall's entrance. "From the ashes of hatred, we rise stronger together." The words, suggested by a local high school student, perfectly captured the Phoenix Foundation's mission. The community had not just responded to hatred, they had transformed it. Every dollar Lucas had spent trying to divide them had been multiplied in service of unity. Every moment of planned humiliation had been converted into an opportunity for healing. In the end, Lucas Benjamin's $50 million investment in hate had funded something he never intended, a revolution of love, justice, and transformation that would impact generations to come. Arena's choice. Arena James sat alone in her luxury apartment, staring at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights twinkled below, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was consumed by the weight of her role in Lucas's cruel scheme. The diamond ring he had given her, the one meant to mock Aileen, lay untouched in its box, a constant reminder of her complicity. For weeks after the party, she had isolated herself, drowning in shame and regret. The media had labelled her Lucas's accomplice, though some more sympathetic outlets called her the other victim. But Irina knew she was neither. She was something more complicated, a woman who had chosen willful ignorance over moral courage. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 months after the party. Her phone buzzed with an unexpected message. "Would you be willing to meet Aileen Wuornos?" The cafe where they met was small and quiet, far from the upscale establishments Irina usually frequented. Aileen was already there when Irina arrived, sitting calmly at a corner table, the moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I'm so sorry," Irina began, her carefully prepared speech crumbling into those simple words. Aileen's response surprised her. "I know you are, but sorry isn't enough anymore, is it?" What followed was a 4-hour conversation that would change Irina's life forever. Aileen didn't just listen to Irina's apologies, she challenged her to examine the deeper issues that had led her to participate in Lucas's scheme. "You had chances to warn me," Aileen pointed out, her voice firm but not unkind. "What stopped you?" Irina's answer revealed uncomfortable truths about privilege, complicity, and the cost of silence. She spoke about growing up in a world where success meant conforming to certain expectations, where questioning the status quo meant risking one's position in society. "But you did speak up finally," Aileen reminded her. "On that stage, you chose to walk away. That moment matters too." It was then that Aileen made an unexpected proposal. The Phoenix Foundation was launching a new initiative called Breaking the Cycle, aimed at helping people recognize and combat their own biases. They needed someone who understood both sides of the divide, someone who had lived in privilege but chosen to step away from it. "Your story," Aileen explained, "could help others understand that it's never too late to choose differently." Irina's transformation began with small steps. She enrolled in diversity and inclusion courses. She attended community meetings at the foundation. She listened to stories from people whose lives had been affected by discrimination. Most importantly, she began to speak out. Her first public speaking engagement was terrifying. Standing before a room full of corporate executives, she detailed her journey from complicity to consciousness. She shared painful truths about the subtle ways privilege perpetuates discrimination, about the small compromises that lead to larger moral failures. "I was not just Lucas's fiancée," she told them. "I was a symbol of the comfort and privilege that silence can buy. But that comfort comes at a terrible cost, not just to others, but to our own humanity." Her testimony proved powerful precisely because she spoke from experience. She understood the rationalizations, the willful blindness, the small decisions that allowed discrimination to flourish in corporate environments. More importantly, she could articulate a path forward. The Breaking the Cycle program grew rapidly under her leadership. Irina developed workshops that helped others recognize their own biases and take active steps to combat them. She worked closely with corporate HR departments to identify and address systemic discrimination. But perhaps her most significant impact came through one-on-one mentoring. She began working with young professionals, helping them navigate ethical challenges in their careers. Her message was clear: success doesn't have to come at the cost of moral compromise. A year after the party, Irina made another difficult choice. She sold everything she had acquired during her relationship with Lucas: the designer clothes, the luxury car, the expensive jewelry, and donated the proceeds to the foundation's scholarship fund. The diamond ring that was meant to mock Aileen was transformed too. Working with local artists, Irina had it melted down and recast into hundreds of small phoenix pendants, each one given to graduates of the Breaking the Cycle program as a reminder that transformation is always possible. Her relationship with Aileen evolved from awkward reconciliation to genuine friendship. They often appeared together at events, their stories serving as a powerful testament to the possibility of change and redemption. Arena's choice, Aileen would often say in their joint presentations, reminds us that we all have moments when we must decide who we really are. It's never too late to choose differently. On the anniversary of the party, Arena stood once again in the transformed ballroom. This time, she wasn't there as Lucas's accomplice, but as a keynote speaker at the Foundation's annual conference on corporate responsibility. Looking out at the audience, she began her speech with words that would be quoted often. "A year ago, I stood on this stage as part of a plan to divide people. Today, I stand here having learned that our choices define us not in single moments, but in the thousands of decisions we make every day to be better than we were yesterday." Her choice had not erased her past complicity, but it had transformed it into a powerful tool for change. In choosing to confront her own role in perpetuating discrimination, Arena had discovered a truth that would guide her future work. Redemption begins not with forgiveness from others, but with the choice to become part of the solution. As she finished her speech, a small phoenix pendant gleamed at her throat, a constant reminder that from the ashes of our worst choices, something beautiful can rise. A historic settlement. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters on the morning the final settlement details were announced. The numbers were staggering: $7.1 billion in total damages, the largest civil rights settlement in American history. But it wasn't just the amount that made this settlement historic. It was how the money would be used. Judge Maria Rodriguez had appointed a diverse panel of experts to oversee the distribution of funds, ensuring that every dollar would serve the cause of justice and healing. The settlement was structured across multiple initiatives, each designed to create lasting change. The Educational Revolution Fund, $2 billion, full scholarships for 10,000 minority students annually, creation of new STEM programs in underserved communities, construction of 5 new technical colleges in historically disadvantaged areas, teacher training programs focusing on inclusive education, research grants for studies on eliminating educational disparities. The panel had transformed Lucas's former headquarters into the first of these technical colleges. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The building that had once housed his discriminatory empire now served as a beacon of opportunity. The Business Empowerment Initiative, $1.5 billion, low-interest loans for minority-owned businesses, mentorship programs pairing experienced executives with new entrepreneurs, technology grants for small businesses, professional development workshops, market access programs to help small businesses compete with larger corporations. Sarah Martinez, Lucas's former CFO, took particular satisfaction in helping design this portion of the settlement. "We're not just giving people money," she explained. "We're giving them the tools and knowledge that Lucas tried to keep from them." Community Development Fund, $1.3 billion. Affordable housing developments in urban areas, healthcare facilities in underserved neighborhoods, cultural centers celebrating diversity, public transportation improvements, environmental justice initiatives. Each project within this fund required community input and oversight, ensuring that development served actual community needs rather than outside interests. The Justice and Advocacy Center, $1 billion, free legal services for discrimination cases, civil rights research and documentation, policy advocacy programs, training for law enforcement in anti-discrimination practices, support for grassroots civil rights organizations. The center, housed in what was once Lucas's private law firm, became a powerful force for systematic change in the legal system. Historical documentation and education, $800 million. Creation of a civil rights history museum. Oral history project, documenting experiences of discrimination. Development of educational materials for schools. Digital archive of civil rights struggles. Training programs for teachers and historians. The museum would include a permanent exhibition about Lucas's party and its aftermath, ensuring that the story would serve as both a warning and an inspiration for future generations. Mental health and healing, $500 million. Counseling services for victims of discrimination, community healing programs, research into racial trauma and recovery, training for mental health professionals in cultural competency, support groups and wellness programs. This portion of the settlement acknowledged that the damage of discrimination goes beyond the physical and economic. It leaves emotional scars that need healing. The settlement also included several groundbreaking provisions: accountability measures, regular audits of fund usage, public reporting requirements, community oversight committees, impact assessment studies, independent monitoring of programs, innovation grants, funding for new approaches to fighting discrimination, technology solutions for bias detection, research into systemic racism, development of new teaching methodologies, social enterprise initiatives. Perhaps most significantly, the settlement established the Truth and Transformation Commission, a permanent body charged with documenting ongoing discrimination, recommending policy changes, monitoring corporate practices, supporting whistleblowers, facilitating dialogue between communities. The Commission's first report, released 6 months after its establishment, became a blueprint for corporate accountability nationwide. The settlement also addressed personal accountability. Lucas Benjamin was required to make public apologies in major newspapers, attend anti-racism education programs, perform community service, submit to regular monitoring of his business activities, fund research into the psychology of hate. But the most powerful aspect of the settlement was its ripple effect. Other corporations, seeing the consequences of discrimination laid bare, began proactive reforms. Industries that had long ignored diversity issues suddenly found themselves competing to demonstrate commitment to change. The settlement's impact extended beyond America's borders. International organizations studied its structure as a model for addressing systemic discrimination globally. The United Nations cited it as an example of how justice systems can address historical wrongs. 5 years after the settlement, an independent assessment found that 50,000 students had received educational support. 3,000 new minority-owned businesses had been established, 20 new community centers had been built, 100,000 people had received legal assistance, countless lives had been transformed. At the 5-year commemoration ceremony, Aileen Wuornos stood at the podium, surrounded by those whose lives had been touched by the settlement. What began as one man's attempt to humiliate has become a movement for transformation, she declared. Every dollar he spent on hate has been multiplied in service of justice. The historic settlement, as it came to be known, proved that justice could be more than punishment. It could be a force for systematic change. What Lucas Benjamin had intended as a display of power had instead become a testament to the power of justice, to transform lives and communities. As Judge Rodriguez had written in her final approval of the settlement, money cannot erase the past, but when properly directed, it can help build a better future. This settlement is not just about compensation, it's about transformation. Seeds of change. A final message. The story of Lucas Benjamin, Aileen Wuornos, and the transformation that followed teaches us several powerful lessons. 1. Hatred, no matter how wealthy or powerful its source, cannot triumph over united communities. Lucas spent $50 million to divide people, but instead united them stronger than ever. His empire crumbled while the community grew stronger, too. Every act of cruelty can be transformed into an opportunity for positive change. The party venue became a community center. The hate speech became evidence for justice. The money meant for humiliation funded education and empowerment. 3. True redemption comes through action, not just words. Arena transformed from accomplice to advocate. Corporate leaders changed from bystanders to activists. The community turned trauma into triumph. 4. Justice works best when it focuses on transformation rather than just punishment. The settlement didn't just punish Lucas, but created lasting positive change. Legal consequences became community resources. Personal pain became public purpose. Final reflection. In the end, this story reminds us that the human spirit has an extraordinary capacity for resilience and transformation. No amount of money, power, or privilege can overcome the united strength of people standing together for justice and dignity. The greatest power lies not in the ability to harm, but in the choice to heal, unite, and transform. As Aileen often said, hatred may have brought us together, but love and justice will keep us united forever.